So I've been using the M1 iPad Pro 12.9 inch ever since release on May 21st, and I decided to hold off on my review to see what WWDC has in stores for us. And long and behold, Apple introduced iPadOS 15. Just like everybody else, I'm just as surprised to see how Apple didn't utilize the M1 chip on the iPad Pros this year. We had the widgets on the home screen. We have an app library, basically an app drawer. And essentially we just got all the things that we missed on iPadOS 14 is now on iPadOS 15. Plus a little bit of new features such as a brand new way to multitask on the iPad. We was all expecting an overhaul to iPadOS because this has the power. This is featuring the same good old design of the 2018 iPad. The squared off design gives a modern look to the iPad. This design aged extremely well. Despite it being 3 years old, there's nothing wrong with keeping the same old design. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. ProMotion 120 Hz refresh rate is still present here. And we have the same old cameras from last year's iPad Pro 2020. We have the LiDAR, we have the ultra wide, and we have the wide camera. And then now what's new about this year's iPad, you have Thunderbolt. So you have extreme fast data transfer, and you still have the smart connector on the back. That's the best thing Apple has done, because that's gonna allow us to connect accessories such as the Magic Keyboard. The white holds up really well, no dirts, no complaints just yet. I would say if you're buying an iPad Pro or the iPad Air 4, you gotta get the Magic Keyboard case. That's like a no-brainer. You may as well factor that in with the price. Now, one of the highlights of the iPad Pro 12.9 inch is that mini LED display. It is jaw-dropping to see rich blacks on an iPad Pro. So this is packing the Liquid Retina XDR display, which means this has 1000 nits of brightness. And if you're watching HDR content, you can peak the brightness at 1600, which is just insane. So basically Apple's XDR display, which is very expensive, that's like $6,000, it is on this iPad Pro 12.9 inch. Unfortunately, the 11 inch model is still rocking the same old Liquid Retina display, which is not a bad thing. That still has 600 nits of brightness, that can still get pretty bright, but nonetheless, you don't have the spiciness of the 12.9 inch display. Now, a lot of people have been reporting the mini LED was bleeding. So if you're watching a very contrasty movie, so for example, if you have white text on the black background, the display kind of like bleeds off or it blooms. So for some people that hinders their viewing experience or just the quality of the display. But me personally, it doesn't bother me. You have a feature called center stage. The iPad is automatically gonna pan the camera, keeping you in focus. This is very handy if you want to show somebody something real fast. You don't have to pick up the iPad, you can have it stationary. Center stage is a marvelous feature to say the least. I hope it makes its way up to the iPhone because it is just so cool. And in terms of the RAM, if you go with the 128 through half a terabyte, gigabyte of storage, you get 8 gigabytes of RAM. Or if you go with the big boy, or big boys, 1 terabyte through 2 terabytes, again 16 gigabytes of RAM. And this is where we start to speculate, what is Apple gonna do with all that power? And they gave us iPadOS 15 just to give us widgets. You need all that power to give us widgets. The M1 chip doesn't break a sweat at all on the iPad Pro. This is definitely gonna last you for years to come. You have a bunch of apps that's memorized in the background. Just wish we had more Pro apps to take advantage of it. Final Cut Pro, Xcode. You have something called Swift Playgrounds. You can now build apps on your iPad, which is pretty cool, but you could do the same thing on your iPad Air, or you could do the same thing on the iPad Mini. It just doesn't make sense to drop almost $2,000 for the 12.9 inch iPad Pro just to build those apps when you could do it on your $300 iPad. You know, iPads are so good nowadays that I use my iPad Pro as a laptop, but my MacBook Pro as a desktop when I'm connecting it to an external display. And it's just fun to pass around. So if I want to show somebody something, bloop, here it is on my iPad. Just so futuristic. But we need to improve that software. But I feel like we're almost there. We're getting so close, but we're not there yet. Even though the battery is bigger, we're getting the same battery performance. And not to mention, we have that mini LED, and especially if you max out the brightness, the battery life is going to shoot. So the 11 inch battery life is actually better than the 12.9 inch. In conclusion, I feel like the iPad this year is a little weird. We have the M1 chip found on the MacBooks, but the software isn't utilizing that M1 power. And maybe I would say this iPad is targeted to people who haven't jumped the gun yet. Maybe you're still rocking out with your iPad Pro first generation, even though that's still getting the updates and you can still get the widgets on your home screen. And you know, my mom has the first generation 12.9-inch iPad Pro right now, and 6 years later, that's still going strong. It's still getting the updates, and it is slowing down. You can start to see it's aging, but it's not slow. Or maybe technically, if you have an iPad Air 2 or a really old iPad, you're gonna love this iPad. And even better, you can get a refurbished iPad Pro 2018 or even last year's model. Check the Apple refurbished clearance section. You're gonna find some amazing deals and save some money, because you're gonna need the Apple Pencil, you're gonna need the Magic Keyboard. One word I could describe the iPad Pro M1, it's just overpowered. It's good, but it's overpowered for what it is.